Our next panel moderator is Ron Prater. Ron Prater has been the executive director of Big City Emergency Managers. He's the chief operating officer, operating officer since March of 2013. He is also the co-founder of Bent Ear Solutions, LLC, a small consulting firm focused on helping public safety agencies plan for and implement emerging technology. And he has more than 25 years experience helping the private sector and federal, states, and local branches of government address some of their most pressing issues. For more of that information, please see the website where the bios are. He does have way more wonderful stuff about the amazing man he is. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to you, Ron, so you can introduce our final panel of the day.
Sadie, thank you very much. That was a great panel you all just had too. Appreciate your time very much. All right. Well, I guess we're at the end of the 2 days. I see my panelists are joining us. I got a couple more coming on. Excellent. So good afternoon. I am Ron Prater, and I'll serve as the moderator of this afternoon's panel on climate change, which is an existential threat with disproportionate impacts on the whole community. Before we get started, I will give you a little about myself and the panelists. Sadie did cover my background, so I'm not going to jump into that, but one thing she mentions, I am the executive director of Big City Emergency Managers. If you're not familiar with that group, it is a small not-for-profit that includes the directors of emergency management from 15 of the largest jurisdictions in the country. Together, these emergency managers serve over 20% of the nation's population, and I'm incredibly blessed to be part of that group. Mary Ellen, who I will introduce in a second, is part of that group as well. I am a middle-aged Caucasian of medium build, wearing a dark blue check shirt. And while I'm not bald yet, I am very close, as some of you can tell. I am now I'm fortunate to introduce the amazing panelists. I hope you took a few minutes to review their bios, as I'm not going to read those verbatim. I will say that you have an amazing panel of experts that cover a wide array of real experiences and perspectives. I hope you practice active listening today, and please please add any questions into the chat, and we'll try to address them as best we can after they do their opening remarks. For my brief introductions, I'll start with Vance Taylor. He's America's friend, and many of you have known him already. If you don't, he is the chief of the Office of Access and Functional Needs for California's Office of Emergency Services, which many of you all know as Cal OES. He is a gifted storyteller, one of the best I've ever met, a national recognized public speaker, and a leading advocate for individuals with disabilities. Then there's Alex Guinness, who is the Deputy Director of Sustain Our Abilities, which is a non-for-profit, focused on the intersection of climate change, health, and disability. Though I have only known Alex for a few months now, he's already taught me a lot about the issues related to this topic. I'm incredibly fortunate that Vance introduced me to Alex, and I believe he's going to give you all a lot to think about today. Then there's Bob Troy, who is the Assistant Director of the the Assistant Director and Interagency Recovery Coordinator for Cal OES. He is currently the State Disaster Recovery Coordinator for the 2023 California winter storms and floods. As you know, he probably has a lot of free time on his hands. He has also worked for both FEMA and the City of Chicago's Office of Emergency Management and Communications. So he brings a broad array of experiences to this conversation. And finally, we have Mary Ellen Carroll, who is the Executive Director of the Department of Emergency Management in San Francisco, as well as the Vice Chair of Big City Emergency Managers that I talked about a minute ago. Her role in San Francisco has her involved in all aspects of the city, from planning a response to natural disasters to helping the city address challenges like homelessness and the impacts of fentanyl. I can tell you firsthand that she is an innovator, she's inspiring, and she's passionate about today's topic. Now let's jump into some remarks from each of these panelists about climate change and its impact on the whole community. Don't forget, please add questions to the Q&A in this forum, and we'll do our best to get them. And panelists, please describe yourself as you start your introduction. Vance, I'm going to start with you to open this up.
All right, thanks, Ron. I appreciate it. It's great to be with you, great to be with the panel, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in to this symposium. So, all right, let's see, to describe myself, which is always tricky, right? So I've got, I think, a pretty good set of hair on my head. Black, although I will say lately, if I'm saying salt and pepper, there's probably more salt than pepper. These days, I think that's part of the work I do. I am a light-skinned Latino male. I'm wearing a collared shirt. And I think depending on the day, maybe a handsome looking dude, I don't know. We can open up a poll in the Zoom probably for that. So, this particular topic is one that I'm really glad to be able to participate on in terms of the panel. Right, so, but as you said, Ron, I serve as the chief for the Office of Access and Functional Needs at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. And one of the realities that we deal with is the fact that whenever disasters strike, and wherever they strike in the state, and we've got a big state with a lot of people and a very, very diverse risk landscape. What we find is that there's one thing that is a common thread. And it's that people with access and functional needs get hit the hardest. And what we're seeing with climate change is not just an increase in the number of disasters that we face, but really it's an increase in the scope and scale and devastation associated with those disasters. And I'll just point out that before I came on, in the 12 years before I came on, I think we had 5 major declarations. And in the 8 years I've been on, that number is over 20. And so that just shows you that there's been sort of this exponential increase in the number of disasters and the devastation associated with those events. It's under climate change that we see stronger and more frequent storms, increased drought, increased air pollution, increased wildfires, the threats from coastal sea rise, and of course, an increase in extreme temperatures, right? The highs and the lows. So let's think about the impact that those incidents and events have on people with access and functional needs. It's when a storm hits and power goes out. Individuals that use ventilators, respirators, CPAPs, BiPAPs, assisted devices and technologies that assist in their breathing face asphyxiation, suffocation, or respiratory arrest. When mudslides make major roads and highways impassable, people that rely on home delivery for medicine, oxygen tanks, durable medical equipment, or other critical life-sustaining assets are placed at jeopardy. When flooding happens and mass evacuations take place, as occurred earlier this year, individuals that depend on accessible transportation services sometimes become isolated due to the inability of providers to meet the increased demand for services. And when extreme temperatures impact people with disabilities and people with access and functional needs, those that don't have properly functioning HVAC systems are at risk for serious health impacts. So the struggle is real. I will say my office exists to ensure that access and functional needs are included, considered, and embedded within response, logistics, planning, recovery. But that's our role. We include access and functional needs within the state emergency plan, our disaster recovery framework, our flood plan, our El Nino exercises, any other document, guidance, or best practice that you can think of, including in the state extreme heat plan, which we are in phase 2 of right now. But all of that is for naught if we don't work together to incorporate access and functional needs within the climate change related strategies that are being developed throughout the emergency management space. We have to come at this together through inclusive and integrated practices, or we will risk increased human suffering, increased loss of life, and the missed opportunity to become a stronger, more resilient nation.
Vance, thank you. I appreciate those openings and really the national scale that you're talking about. I think is very important. Alex, I'm gonna throw it over to you now.
Yeah, hi, thanks everybody. My name is Alex Guinness. I'm the Deputy Director of Sustain Our Abilities and also the subject matter expert for the California Functional Assessment Service Teams program. And I am a Caucasian man with dark features, wearing a red long sleeve t-shirt and a gaming headset with large ear things. So just wanted to kind of set the context around climate change. You know, Vance started to get into this, but um, uh, obviously the climate is changing. There's momentum built into the system that even if we rapidly decarbonize, is still going to be there for a while. So I think a lot of us psychologically look at the situation at hand and want to think, okay, this year set of passing storms is an aberration. It was stressful to deal with. I know for functional assessment service teams, there were a lot of deployments. Certainly Vance was very busy. And I'm sure all of you, anybody else here in California working on this was very busy. But this is the beginning of really a trend of what's going to be worse events, potentially more catastrophic events, hitting more pain points and areas of kind of infrastructural vulnerability, you know, running up against issues with flooding and our infrastructure and the rest of it. So we simply need to kind of buckle up, get ready for an exacerbating crisis, work together, work with the disability community, and keep everybody safe and protect lives and well-being. The context too that I want to put here is thinking about how this all fits in with the intersection of disability and climate change. One framework I always put out is if you can imagine climate change being a really complex problem that we're dealing with, might have 100 different factors. I'm just throwing out a number here, but you could easily, you know, spend probably an hour or two writing down 100 different factors that have to do with climate change, from specific types of natural disasters to even the good around green energy transition and more sustainable urban layouts and housing. And then you could look at disability, and certainly with specific diagnoses, different aspects of access and functional needs, you could probably make a list of 100 disability factors that you care about on the medical side, on the social side, on the infrastructural side, on what government services provide. Again, even as I mentioned, good housing, you could talk about housing accessibility and what that means to the disability community. So you have 100 climate change things on one side, 100 disability things on the other, and you could draw a line between pretty much any one of those and have 10,000 connections that are relevant to climate change and disability. I throw this framework out there because you all are working on some of those connections in your jobs. You might be spending some of your volunteer time or time outside of work focusing on another one or two of those connections. So I just hope that you all feel empowered, that you are addressing this topic, even if it's a little kind of niche corner of it. So first of all, just have a sense of empowerment around this. Recognize that there's always more to be done. There's always more to be investigated. Here in this symposium and with the work that a lot of people are doing, the presentations that you've seen, you're certainly learning that there are a lot of new um, practices, best practices, and innovative strategies to address access and functional needs in the context of disasters and climate change. So that's valuable and important. Also, if you look at, say, a specific disability and a specific climate impact, or a category of disabilities and a category of climate impact, you could say, and I'll use an example of myself, I have a spinal cord injury, right? Is that, let's look at spinal cord injuries and extreme heat. With my disability, there are medical and social factors that are relevant to my disability. So on the medical side, I have issues with thermoregulation, with vasodilation, with sweating, things like that, that make it so that if you put me and then an able-bodied person outside in the same amount of shade or sun, I'm going to have a harder time dealing with that extreme heat. And then there are social factors, which would be access to quality, accessible housing with good insulation, double pane windows, good heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, so HVAC systems, and whether that housing is available and accessible, and whether that housing is within a decent price point for someone with a disability. And you could go farther and to say, is that available in, say, San Francisco or Oakland or some of our coastal areas that are more shielded from extreme heat than, say, Sacramento? So that's a social factor, and there are more social factors that would be relevant. You say, okay, so how does extreme heat impact Alex's health on the medical side? Very clear what that concern is. And as you encounter, say, people with spinal cord injuries during extreme heat, that's something that you'll need to consider, right? That's a consideration, that's a factor. And then on the social side, you could say, oh, well, actually, for people with spinal cord injuries, they, because of lower income, tend to live in substandard housing, and housing that might not have air conditioning, and housing that is in areas with greater climate risks in general, but in this case, more extreme heat concerns. And there, okay, all right, so people with spinal cord injuries disproportionately live in places that are not well equipped to manage the temperature inside their home. Combine those two things together, say, all right, we have a decent picture of the SCI and heat kind of nexus. And then we start to work on solutions. And within your jobs, I'm sure you can encounter and consider a bunch of different solutions that you would work on. So I'll just say those are the two frameworks as we're approaching climate change and disability to keep in mind in the work that you're doing, and then working with specific populations. And that's during preparation and then also during recovery. If somebody, their house gets destroyed during a wildfire, and that they are in an area that is dealing with more extreme heat, and they have a disability that puts them at excess danger to extreme heat, then maybe as you are working with social services to help that person kind of find new living situations, that extreme heat might be one of the things that you consider when you're looking for a home for them. Trying really to find something with good insulation, maybe helping out with HVAC, helping them sign up for, subsidized electricity bills to be able to manage heavier AC loads. So again, just trying to paint the bigger picture here, and look forward to talking a little bit more later about the specifics.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. I think those lived experiences are amazing. Also, I need to touch on the fact that I told people to put Q&A in the chat, but you can't do that. So we'll you have other ways I think that were announced to submit your questions. Bob, over to you from Cal OES perspective.
Thanks, Ron, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Bob Troy. I'm an Asian male in his 50s. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm originally from Chicago, been in California since 2015. I have a 2-year-old daughter, so the subject of climate change and its impacts, really are something that I take extremely personally, right? And so I feel a little bit like Mr. Doom and Gloom sometimes when talking to coworkers or friends, but I think unfortunately with good reason. And I know we're to a large degree preaching to the choir today. You wouldn't be in the session, part of this conversation, or wanting to learn more if you weren't personally invested through your job or through your personal life and trying to identify and lessen the impacts of climate change on AFN populations and our more vulnerable populations in general. But I think for just a little bit of awareness for folks that aren't from California, or even maybe some folks that are, we've had, suffice it to say, certainly the time that I've been in California, just an incredible increase in the amount of disaster activity, as Vance mentioned earlier, but some additional kind of data points. Number one, for our current storm recovery across the state that we're working on, this is a whiplash event, of course, coming off of many years of extreme drought, but we have 53 of our 58 counties that are a part of the major disaster declaration. So, virtually the entire state, if we include the emergency declaration, it's 57 out of 58. This comes on the heels of a number of years of seemingly endless fire impacts, right? And so really, when it comes to burned acres in recorded California history, more than half have been since 2019. And really, the bulk of them in 2020 and 2021. We're seeing fires on a scope and scale and size that we have not before. The top 8 fires in California history have all been in the last 6 years consecutively, right? No gaps in between. That's not a fluke. That's not an accident. The good news is that we have exponentially increased our resources in California when it comes to responding to fires, but also preventing them. But we have to operate under the assumption that this trend is only going to increase further, despite whatever investment of resources we have. And it's going to be incumbent upon all of us to, on a personal level and a professional level, to help as part of the whole community, to help plan to identify what those real impacts are on all of our populations, certainly AFN, and what we can do together to help solve this, because there is no single level of government that can do this. Government alone on all levels most certainly cannot do this. It's going to take all of our elements of our whole community to do that. They say disasters always exacerbate pre-existing community conditions, just like they do on a personal level, right? And that's absolutely true. And so, one pre-existing condition we have in California is a lack of affordable housing, right? And so, just since 2017, just for fires alone, we've lost about 35,000 homes and more than 50,000 structures that have been burned up. We need to be increasing and creating more housing, not reducing the amount of housing stock that we have in California. And it, of course, takes years to rebuild from a fire, both from housing and an infrastructure component, right? As far as temperature increases, well, we had last September our 10-day heat dome in California, where we broke records across the entire state. It was 118 degrees here in Sacramento. I'm breaking the all-time record. It's going to be 108 to 112 this coming weekend. There again, these are not flukes. It's projected that by the year 2100 in California, we'll have an average annual maximum daily temperature increase between 5.6 and 8.8 degrees by the end of the century. And that's just massive when you look at the average temperatures. Our water supply from our snowpack in the Sierras here in California is expected to be reduced by 2/3. We have it this year. We have not had it the past 5, 6, 7 years, and it will only decrease on average in the future. The area burned in wildfires is expected to increase by 77%. And that's, that is, there's only so much forest to burn. Unfortunately, we're burning more and more into what's called our wildland urban interface, or in any areas that have not burned before, where we do have significant numbers of our population living. Heat health events are only going to increase. They're projected to start growing instead of several day events into, our planning assumption is 2-week-long events multiple times per year. And in particular in our Sierra regions, which have generally been more immune to that. And I know Mary Ellen can certainly tell of the challenges in the Bay Area when it comes to heat, which is really a challenge that really wasn't there, until recently. But even this year, as we're expecting 4 to 10 times more heat health events that we're going to have to deal with. So, and then when it comes to sea level rise, just one tidbit aside from our other modeling for anybody that's not tracking is in the Antarctic, we have something called Thwaites Glacier, which is a glacier the size of Florida. And it is in the process of falling into the ocean and melting rapidly. The damage has already been done. It's just simply a matter of how long it will take for those impacts to be felt. It could be 10 years, it could be several decades. At a minimum, we expect 1 to 3 feet of sea level rise from that. It could be more depending how much of the other glaciers it takes with it as it goes. So even just if 1 to 3 sea level rise, California is in one sense better prepared because we are, by virtue of our higher coastlines, and we don't have as many low-lying areas as other parts of the country. On the other hand, many parts of California are also sinking, right, because of drought, because of groundwater subsidence. We also we have many areas that are sinking at the same time, and so we're actually going to face an increased amount of sea level rise compared to other areas, and that impacts not just the coastal areas. So one of the impacts for somebody like me in Sacramento and anybody in our Central Valley is that there will be sea level rise that'll come up via the San Francisco Bay, and it will impact our aquifers here in the Delta. Huge percentage of the country and world's the agriculture comes from the Valley of California, right? So it's not just an impact to our drinking water, it'll also have significant national and international repercussions in terms of the ability to provide food, certainly to the entire country, right? And that damage is already done to some degree. So I say all of this not just to throw out interesting tidbits or be a doom and gloomer, but just to really, I think, emphasize that we're all committed or need to be committed to acting now. Time is of the essence. There is a lot, thankfully, that we can do and that we are doing, but there's a lot of work that remains to be done, and it really will take everybody that's at the table to do this. So I'm really really impressed. We have 800 or so people on this session right now, and I'm sure that's 800 people that will be that will take this call to action for all of us, help us spread each other's messages, and help us work together to reduce the impacts on all of our communities, but certainly our most vulnerable populations and our AFN populations in particular. So I know we're going to talk further about more specific things that are being done or can be done, but I'll pause there. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Bob. The stats you threw out there are frightening, to say the least. Mary Ellen, your San Francisco perspective, but I should also say, even though I think Mary Ellen's major role on this call is from San Francisco, as I mentioned before, she has a national perspective. She gets around the country and really gets to talk to some very innovative emergency management organizations about what's going on. So I think she really has a national perspective as well. So Mary Ellen.
Thank you, Ron. Hello, everyone. To describe myself, I am a middle-aged brunette. I'm wearing glasses. I have a black shirt on. I'm sitting in my office with some plants behind me and a San Francisco Giants hat behind. I'm a petite woman, but interestingly, from Zoom, one time I met someone after a meeting. Actually, this happened more than once, and they said, "Wow, I thought you were 6'2". So I took it as a compliment, I guess. But anyway, I present taller than I am. I'm 4'11". So happy to be here. And in fact, I just returned last night from a conference in Denver, the Natural Hazards Workshop Symposium, in which I was on a panel with some of my colleagues from Philadelphia, Denver, and LA. And this was also, certainly climate change was a big part of what we were discussing. I'm afraid that at the end of it, we looked at each other and we're like, did we just leave everyone with a dystopian view of the future? Because it is quite serious, the issues of climate change, but a lot of other things we were talking about. And I think what I want to say as a local emergency manager, but also, as Ron said, someone who is engaged at the national level, that we are spread extremely thin in emergency management right now. We are taking on, the topic of the panel yesterday was sort of untraditional emergencies, of which we're all doing everything essentially, from climate change adaptation, mitigation, response, to dealing with the socioeconomic issues of homelessness, the opioid epidemic, the drug markets, migrant and asylum seekers in our big city that have, this, which has been a new enormous sort of issue and crisis for cities to handle. And so, and we know that regardless of the emergency, that our vulnerable populations, of which AFN falls under, are always impacted disproportionately. And I personally, I don't think that we have, from an emergency management perspective, done a great job in this area. And furthermore, I will say that we learned a lot during COVID about community, whole community, and equity. But within those categories, especially within the categories of equity, and I'll just speak for San Francisco, I think that AFN has fallen the most short when it comes to our approach to equity. So we do have a lot of work to do. There are, I don't want to repeat so much of what my really brilliant colleagues here have already said, but we have an issue. I mean, just yesterday I was on this literally national stage with hundreds of people. And just yesterday in Denver, it was 96 degrees. If you look at a map of the country right now, it's literally red hot. The waters around Florida have been described as bubbling like a jacuzzi. And in the Northeast, there have been catastrophic flooding, which have stranded people, that have taken out power, and that is expected to begin again, I think, tomorrow or this weekend. So, and yet it does feel like we just act like we're planning for climate change. We are deeply, deeply in it right now. And I think when it comes to, and we had some good discussions in advance of this around housing, for instance, and even issues of, I mentioned migrants and asylum seekers, but we are going to continue to see people emigrating from areas that are impacted by climate change, and we're not ready for that. And I don't believe that we have the coordinated discussions and shared kind of values and vision to get where we need to go on any of these issues. But housing is a great example. I know that when I'm in discussions around housing or development, let's say, it tends to be from the perspective of seismic vulnerabilities and long-term planning. Within that, there are many different, there's many considerations, many of them economic, of course. And I find that the individuals that are in this sort of stakeholders and individuals that are in these conversations do not have a shared vision and values, right? We all are like in our silos. So I'm thinking about earthquakes and climate adaptation, changes and hardening within our buildings. But other people are thinking about like tax impacts. Others are thinking about cultural and other sort of more aesthetic issues around housing. And then there's infrastructure, right? So just an example, I think that we have more to do in government to bring these issues together. I do want to just say that within San Francisco, people laugh at me all the time, especially on the national level, when I say that our trigger for a heat emergency is 85 degrees in San Francisco for a period of 3 days or more. Even Robert is laughing at me right now. So but it is not a laughing matter. Every time that happens, people die in the city. And the people that are dying of heat are people with disabilities, seniors, and folks that have other vulnerabilities. Every time we have a heat event, that happens. So, and that is because our built environment is, we're just not built for these kind of climate. And we're not the only city like that. That is going to continue to happen within the department of my department. We've done an enormous amount of work to help, to bring air conditioning to senior centers, to try to get the information out, to try to figure out how to get people out of their hot houses and homes to cool off, because folks don't want, what we find is we open cooling centers and no one shows up. And so you have to like adapt your cooling centers to different things. I think the power outage, there's been a lot of in California with PSPS, which is the power outage that is planned when there's fires or unplanned, and how to ensure that we're outreaching to vulnerable populations. I think we've made some progress, but we have a lot more to do. And then alert and warning. So my department is that's our responsibility to alert and warn the public and visitors in the city and county of San Francisco for when there's an emergency or heat event. And, for folks that have accessibility issues when it comes to getting alert and warnings, there are solutions to that, but they're, require technology, they require funding, they require support to get out there. And I think that we're nowhere near where we need to be around those alert and warning issues. And again, we've done a lot of focus around language, capability, cultural, which is really important, right? How do you speak culturally to different populations? How do you address people in their language? But for folks that are deaf or hard of hearing, blind and low vision, deaf and blind, cognitive disabilities, mobility disabilities, and limited English, that takes a different approach. And that is one that we have done less focus on. I think we need to do more. On the positive side, we are within San Francisco have started a lot of this, and we are looking at some of our departments that are hiring emergency managers to specifically focus on these issues, which is great. We, within my department, are trying to have more of a focus on that. But we do have, I think a long way to go. The fact that we're having this discussion, the fact that we know what some solutions are great, but we really need to accelerate, I believe, the solutions to that for our response, our alert and warning, but also I think, as Alex and Vance have talked about, around our housing, just our infrastructure, period, because that is equally as important, the day-to-day, the way people live, and the resiliency of housing and the resources that people have day-to-day is just as important, in my opinion, as to when what hits the fan, we need to get information out. So, I feel very humbled to be a part of this conversation. I am not an expert in this area. And so for that reason, I come to this with humility and with my ears open. For the folks that are listening, as far as follow-up, for anyone that wants to get involved, or feels like they have resources or information to share, I really welcome that with open arms. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Mary Ellen, thank you. And for the current panel, we did a lot of planning going into this and kind of teed up some questions we'd talk through, but I'm going to scare you right now. So I'm going to go off script a little bit for a second, because your opening comments kind of couple of things. So Vance opened with the fact that the increase in scope and devastation, the struggle is real. Alex, you talked about the trend of more catastrophic events. Bob, you talked about all the data, talking about the climate change impacts. And Mary Ellen, you talked about some specific things. But the one I kind of want to go to all the panelists on, Mary Ellen, you kind of covered this, but you teed this up for me. When you talked about, you really don't see a coordinated vision around climate change and the impacts on the AFN community. So here's my question to the other panelists, and weigh in as you feel fit. Do you think as a nation, are we getting better at this when you start talking about climate change in the AFN community? And if we're not, what can we do as individuals, as the community, and as a nation to get better?
I think we are getting better. I started writing about climate change and disability in 2014. And at that point, there were, I think there were like 2 or 3 few-page white papers on the topic online. And the Functional Assessment Service Team program in California was the first in the country and still relatively new. And I remember going and talking about climate change and disability, and it was new and kind of a mind-blowing topic to a lot of people. And I was the only one at conferences talking about this. And now all of a sudden we have this huge panel. This was something that had already been brought up. I'm in my work writing about climate change and reading about it, and the rest of it certainly have seen a lot more publications, formal publications. Other states are opening, sorry, I'll talk a little bit slower. Other states are opening up FAST programs also. So it's growing. I think we should feel optimistic that the conversation is growing. I think, somebody, Elizabeth in Oklahoma, no, not Elizabeth, somebody else asked about what to do, how emergency managers can be engaged when confronting climate denialism and the fossil fuel industry. As much as that is continuing to be a problem, I think that climate change denialism is finally really being marginalized in the way that it deserves in a lot of places. I think that that the evidence is so clear now that the response is no longer climate change isn't happening, stop being Chicken Little, and instead, the climate was always changing. This 20 disaster declarations in 5 years. Don't worry about it. That's a natural cycle. And that's a losing argument. So I think, everybody is more aware of climate change. The conversation about climate change and disability is expanding. Specific programs with access and functional needs issues are expanding. The one caveat I would say is that disasters tend to still be the focus when people talk about climate change and disability. And while this is very important, as Mary Ellen brought up and as I've brought up, things like housing and transportation, can people with disabilities really effectively live a low carbon lifestyle if there aren't a lot of, as we'd call walkable, or I call rollable or strollable communities right? I say strollable with a capital R for those of us that roll around in wheelchairs. That these strollable communities, if they're not available and affordable to people with disabilities, then can we live a low carbon lifestyle? If is housing resilient? Do bus stops have shade available, or do people with disabilities who disproportionately use public transit compared to able-bodied folks, can they go outside in a heat wave or a heavy downpour and wait for a bus because they need that bus to live a low carbon lifestyle? So again, this is just really complex and multifaceted. I think that there's more focus happening. Actually, a couple of people asked about climate migration. That is luckily starting to get a little bit more focus, but it needs more, much more, really. So we're making progress. There's more to be done. That's my long-winded version of that answer.
Hey,
That's
Ron,
great.
I just
Vance?
want to piggyback on that real quick. So, I agree with what Alex is saying, that yes, progress is being made. But I think what's happening is that we're almost learning on the fly, right? So big disaster hits. Okay, great. What do we do to make sure it needs to be met before, during, and after that event? And then another disaster hits, and great. Lessons learned carry over, and how do we improve? So we're doing better and we're learning more. Where I think that the challenge really lies for us now, just from the emergency management standpoint, is the events are so much bigger. Right? It's one thing to say, okay, we're going to make a shelter that's inclusive and that's physically and programmatically accessible, if it impacts X number of people. But multiply the number of people impacted by a factor of 10. And now, even though we know how to make shelters accessible, finding a way to do that becomes very, very, very difficult. I think Bob would be the first to tell you that, yeah, we can figure out how to help communities recover. But what about when you lose the entire community? Right? That's a different beast altogether. And so while we're getting better at response, we're getting better at recovery, climate change puts all of us behind the 8 ball, so to speak, because of the scope and scale that's associated with it.
Thank you. Bob, or did you want to jump in, look like?
Sure. Yeah, no, thank you, Vance and Alex. Yeah, just I guess the short answer, Ron, is or is it getting better? Absolutely. Is it getting better fast enough? I'm not sure. Right. It really is an existential threat. It's not hyperbole to say that we face an existential right. And Mary Ellen was exactly right when we talk about climate migration, climate refugees in the not too distant future. And that's not just an international problem. That will certainly be a problem within the US, right, as well. So it's something that one way or the other, we certainly need to deal with. As far as how it's getting better, Mary Ellen was also exactly right when she talked about COVID and equity. So it's, in that sense, we certainly got better. That was not a term that was used anywhere near as often prior to COVID as it is now, right? We're still in the process of nailing down what that means and how we can make that better. So we all of a sudden have a lot of grant programs in the US that are that require us to incorporate assessment of vulnerability. And so we use the easy tool to use was the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, and that's great. That's a great start, but it should only be the start. Right, that's a great tool. It's a national tool, so it's consistent. But actually, there are 15 different factors in that, and only one of them is functional needs. Right, and so should it be more than one? Should it be characterized differently, or captured differently, or scored differently? Perhaps, and that's where involvement by all of us is necessary. Right, as a former FEMA employee, I feel really good about what the federal partners do for disaster preparedness, response, and mitigation. They do get better. The programs and policies are based around history and past disasters, and they do update and evolve those policies and programs and funding levels. But it takes time. It takes a lot of time, and it only happens when all of us at the state and local level are vocal about what needs to change, right? They need to be able to point back and say, this is the real need. And so they will get better. There's recently been some attempts to make some funding more accessible by changing the cost benefit analysis method, justify what actually makes financial sense and allowing for some other options to really serve the needs. Right now, there's a comment period on the Community Disaster Resilience Zones Act, which I would encourage everybody to take a look at. It takes a look at using the National Risk Index to really focus where additional technical support, additional funding goes, and that includes identification of vulnerable populations, including AFN populations. But there's a comment period that's open for the next, I think, couple weeks still. And so there's an opportunity for everybody on this call here today to provide feedback to that, to help make sure that that act is instituted as effectively as possible, right? And to make sure that AFN populations get the focus and attention that they need and deserve, right? As part of our broader funding and planning efforts as well. I think we need to take the steps to identify the real impacts from disasters, not just the past ones or the obvious ones. So, for example, in 2018, we had the Camp Fire here in the town of Paradise, wiped out virtually the entire town. We lost almost 15,000 homes. A third of those people were senior citizens with AFN needs. More than 25% of the population overall had AFN needs. The majority of the 85 people that perished because they were unable to evacuate had AFN needs, right? Those are the obvious examples, but there are other impacts and needs as well that are perhaps less visible. We've been working with friends at Cornell University to, amongst other things, they've been looking into impacts from wildfire smoke, which all of a sudden is a big topic all across the country due to recent fire activity out of Canada and other parts of the country, right? And so looking back at some of the more recent fires, during that 2018 fire season, we had 104 deaths in California, but they estimate that there were 3,652 deaths because of smoke impacts. So exponentially more because of smoke than the direct disaster itself. In 2020, we had 33 fatalities. Good news, we're having fewer fatalities because of greater preparedness, evacuation, alert, and warning efforts. But they had an estimated 1,200 deaths due to wildfire smoke impacts, right? And that impacts people that are far, far away from the actual fires themselves. And so measuring the true impacts is key, and then getting engaged. Mary Ellen joked about when San Francisco opens up their warming centers or cooling centers. I laughed because that was me in 2015 when I came from Chicago to California, and I said, wait a second, you open up warming centers when it's below 50 and raining? But the key there that's really true is that threats and hazards are very local, and encourage everybody, if they're not, to get involved with their local mitigation planning efforts, right? Because hazards and risk have to be assessed locally based off of, as Mary Ellen said, what is your built infrastructure? What are your current investments in resilience, et cetera, right? And so it really takes that hyper local engagement and assessment to really provide appropriate feedback on that national level to get the help that we need. So the other piece I would say is building capacity. So on the state level, we've been investing funding to hire local resilience managers because we know that right now most people don't have that as a full-time job. So trying to build that capacity as well. So I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you. Mary Ellen, because you covered some of this already. Did you have anything else to add on that question about, as a nation, are we getting better and what can we do?
Yeah, no, I think that everyone covered it, and my comments. I mean, the thing that comes to mind is that I think, I think there needs to be more kind of federal and state focus on that to hold locals accountable to these issues. And, this is some of the things that we've been talking about at the FEMA leadership level and in our other sort of at the national level. The solutions are going to come at the local level, but if localities are not held accountable to, certain metrics around these issues, whether it's equity across the board, AFN specifically, then it may not rise, to the level. And so I encourage us to be held accountable to those things, just like we are on all the other kind of grant requirements that fund a lot of the work that we do.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Actually, I'm going to direct this one probably at Alex, but the others are feel free to weigh in. Alex, is there any pending legislation that our attendees should be aware of? It's really
it's at the national level. the Ready for Disasters Act, which is REAADI, for Disasters Act. I forget, I could tell you exactly what it stands for. I've got it pulled up right here. So Real Emergency Access for Aging and Disability Inclusion for Disasters Act. Actually you can find out about that at ready.com. So again, REAADI. The other legislation that's tied to that is the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act, which people we have here mentioned migration and displacement as being a climate concern. Domestic climate migration is climate migration. Robert mentioned all the people that perished in fires, but there have been thousands and thousands of structures destroyed every year, and people get displaced. And ideally, they get displaced nearby and be able to keep much of their life together. But if they are displaced across state lines, then they, to go live with a family member or a friend or anything like that, then their Medicaid may be in limbo, and they may not be able to get Medicaid services across state lines. The DRMA is to provide Medicaid coverage when somebody gets displaced across state lines in a federally declared disaster emergency. So those are two really good pieces of legislation. I'd also say, I mean, this, I'm going a little bit off script here, sorry, Ron, but is there, in terms of adaptation, I think also, keep an eye out for anything that will encourage just climate resilience in general, including housing and transportation bills and things like that. I will say, because of the overlap between the 100 climate things and the 100 disability things, if you can improve a piece of the climate puzzle and improve overall resilience, then that's going to benefit the disability community. And even absent equity considerations, right? It's still probably going to benefit us disproportionately in a lot of cases, just because, as long as it meets the ADA requirements for new infrastructure, whatever it might be, it's going to benefit the disability and AFN communities. Focus on things like that, and then every opportunity that you get, really try to figure out how you can nudge a little bit of AFN and inclusion language in there. So that's about that.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate it. So we're down to about just a few minutes left, but I have one more question that kind of builds on a lot of what you all have said already. Vance shared with us the other day the kind of some of the attendee list at a highest level of kind of who's on this call right now. What specific recommendations do you all have for the elected officials, the emergency managers, the planners that are on this call as to how they can help address this climate and AFN issue?
Well, can I just jump in, because I want to say, like, I'm not the expert at the table here on this particular issue, and so I think that all the help that we can get as emergency managers, not only emergency managers, but other leaders and planners in human services, in housing and homeless services, that any tools, educational pieces, things that you think, anyone here thinks that we need to know. I know there's been a lot of things already shared, I think would be very helpful. And just like, the only other thing I would say is that it just reiterates for me this conversation that we as emergency managers need to have, I keep saying we need to have people from community that reflect community in the work that we do. And we need people from the AFN community to be emergency managers also. And so, you know, that is something that I am going to take back and will commit to figuring out how to make that happen. I think we all are very, very resource limited in emergency management and have this very broad scope. And so it is a challenge to carve out that specialty, but I think it is something that we need to do more of.
Great point. Bob or Alex? Bob?
Sure, I can jump in next. Thanks, Ron. Get involved, right? There really are tangible, specific things you can do. Anywhere in the country, you can get involved with your local hazard mitigation plan and provide feedback on prioritization for that. Here at Cal OES, mitigation is part of recovery because after the disaster, frankly, it's mostly too late, right? So we want to bake in resilience in advance. So when we prioritize and give recommendations for funding to FEMA, we give extra points in that scoring to plans or projects that support vulnerable populations in general and AFN populations specifically, so that those projects or proposals are more likely to get funded. We also have state funding to help pay for cost share or those resilience managers. And we also give additional points in scoring and weight for AFN supportive plans. We very strongly think that's a good idea, but we need feedback for you Californians that that's something you think is a good investment and you want us to do or continue to do or do more of, right? If you're in California, your county has a general plan or your city has a general plan, and there's a housing element, there's a safety element. Those require public comment. And so to provide feedback on what needs to be in there that currently isn't is a small but incredibly tangible and beneficial step for building resilience and actual tools and funding in the end. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Bob. Alex?
Yeah, have conversations, right? You are here attending this multi-day event. You're learning. I hope we've provided you with some good information and ideas. When I go and talk to people about climate change and disability, usually people say, "Oh, I didn't think of that before." When I talk to, even people in the disaster space that are relatively familiar with this and try to break things down, explain the nuance, the complexity, how it all fits in with climate change, there are things that they may not have thought about before that become relevant. I'm a bit of a housing buff. I would say, hey, get involved in local pro-housing and just pro-smart development, really, advocacy. That's kind of a growing sphere. But again, when I go to those housing conversations and I say, yes, I work on climate change and disability, people are interested. And I think that you all sit, whether you realize it or not, really at a crossroads of a lot of different conversations and a lot of different policies. And the more people that you can talk to about this work, the more that you can influence things in your job, in a volunteer capacity, at the state level, at the county level, at the local level. Every little bit counts, and every bit of insight you can give other people will kind of radiate out and make a difference. So, I'm sure there are a million different specifics that we could give recommendations on. I would just say learn, try to put things in context in your own mind, and then have conversations with other people and try to enlighten them in a professional capacity, in a personal capacity, and when getting involved in a volunteer capacity.
Thank you, Alex. Vance, you want to add to that?
Sure, look, I'll just piggyback by saying that at the end of the day, and some of you have maybe heard me say this before, but it's true, and I'll say it again, at the end of the day, we're either going to fail or we're going to succeed, but we're going to do it together. Right? So this is so much bigger than any one of us in terms of as individuals, as agencies, as community-based organizations, as policymakers or legislators. The reality is we have to recognize that this is at the very heart of our humanity. That if we don't take proactive steps, not just to limit the impacts of climate change, but to be able to address the disaster-related realities that are associated with climate change, there will, without question, be an increase in human suffering and an increase in loss of life. And so each of us has a role to play, and it is a collective lift, right? So I love that idea that, you know, Mary Ellen's going to lift, right? And Ron, Big City Emergency Managers are lifting, and Cal OES and Alex and others are going to lift, and that together our communities will ascend, right? That's what it's going to take. And when I see the dedication that people have to inclusion and integration, I feel very positive about what would otherwise be a very negative situation or circumstance. So I appreciate that optimism.
Thank you, Vance. And I think that's actually some good thoughts to close on. Vance, one thing that really touched me just now is when you said that, you know, we're going to do this together as the heart of humanity. You know, I think it's the 700 people on this call, it's the other people we know that are not on this call. But as you all said on this call, I heard on the other parts of the symposium that this really has to be a team to solve this issue. So panelists, thank you very much for your time. Greatly appreciate it. And now I'm turning it back over to Sadie.
Oh, Ron, thank you, and this great panel. Thank you all for sharing all your expertise and all the great information there. I really appreciate all your time spent with sharing and the work that you're doing. Wow, it has been a great couple of days. The last 2 days, all of you coming together. I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all, the hosts, the sponsors, the partners, all of you participants, either the ones who are here live or those who are watching this on video. Thank you. Thank you for being part of this and sharing your valuable time. I just want to give a few closing remarks, and then I'm going to hand this over to Anne-Marie, and then Vance will close us out for the whole symposium. As we walk away from the symposium, I have a call to action for you all. As we continue the journey of whole community inclusion and emergency management, I want to encourage you to learn some of the stuff that you learned through any of our training, the symposium, to get that information, make a plan, work that plan, and protect that plan. And you could do that with the call of what I asked you to do at the beginning of today, to make sure that you capture something that you want to start doing, stop doing, and what are some of the things you want to continue and change, as well as some of the items that you may have captured about what things you learned from the symposium. 2 actions you're going to apply two actions that you're going to apply what you learned from the symposium, and 1 way that you're going to share with others. This is a big, huge elephant. It could be a big, huge elephant. But remember, one change and keep working that plan, or keep using that plan, and with a use it so you don't lose it mentality or option, such as our inclusive meeting practices. We'll also invite others to be part of the conversation. So keep working that plan, making that plan, working that plan, and protecting that plan. And make sure that you build depth. The way that you build depth is by doing a use it so you don't lose it model. You could do that by continuously having trainings to help with turnover with any of our partners, our sponsors, our community liaisons, any of those partners. So it doesn't lie on just one of us. We are all coming together to really make an impact in whole community inclusion and emergency management. And that's how we change it from the buzzword whole community inclusion and then a plan for access and functional needs. We're able to make it a whole community inclusion plan from the get-go, making it a universal design. I also want to encourage you to look at your community inclusion and emergency management priorities. If you look at your budget, and I've heard this from others, show me your budget and I'll show you your priorities. If you don't have in your budget that we're going to have whole community inclusion, including people with disabilities and access and functional needs in your budget, then your priorities may not be being supported. So I really want you to encourage, I really want to encourage you to look at your, working with your leadership, your local areas, your state areas, and ask them, hey, show me your budget and I'll show you your priorities. Is whole community inclusion and emergency management part of your priorities? And we are leading by example. California, Vance in California, your team, our team here in Colorado, the International Association for Emergency Management, our Access and Whole Community Inclusion Caucus, you can see that we are trying to make this work. We brought you this symposium. It has reached over 2,700 of you across the nation, and I don't even know if that's also worldwide. And so we just want to make sure that we are we are demonstrating some how-tos tied to the must-tos of whole community inclusion. All right, and with that, I want to leave you with my life philosophy. I hold myself accountable, and I'm asking you to hold yourself accountable as well. I have a life philosophy, and if you've been in any of my trainings or any of my opportunities of sharing with me, I have a life philosophy that says, to not know and do nothing about it is forgivable. To know and do something about it is admirable. To know and do nothing about it is unforgivable. And I'm encouraging you all to do something about it. Make your plan, work your plan, protect your plan. With that, thank you all. I'm handing this over to Anne Marie.
Thank you, Sadie. I know it's been a long day with so much good information shared. I will keep this brief. Just wanted to acknowledge that the NYU's Disability Inclusion and Accessibility Working Group supported this effort. We're happy to be included in the planning of this effort. NYU's Global Inclusion, Diversity and Strategic Innovation is also in support of this, as well as the NYU Center for Disability Studies. And I'm going to share the link because there's lots of good information on that website. There may be something about emergency planning, but it's broader than that. It's a phenomenal group of people. NYU really does value inclusion, diversity, disability inclusion in particular, but all kinds of inclusion as well. And I think that this symposium, really excited to be included in the planning for a second year. Sadie and Vance, Director Gillums, all of the panelists, there are so many people doing the right thing, right? Emergency management is about doing the right thing. It's also a humbling profession. You look at what's happening in Vermont right now. Throughout the country, there are humbling moments. Humbling times are times to work together and learn. It's so important that so many people came together to learn. We're learning from each other. We're not perfect. We found out at the beginning of the symposium, we're not perfect, right? Nobody's perfect, but it's about working together to do the right thing. So with that, thank you everyone for participating, and back to you, Vance.
All right, thanks, Anne-Marie, appreciate it. In closing, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank you for caring about this issue. I want to thank you for taking this in a way that is not just personally commitment, but that's professionally compelling as well. I want to thank very much Anne-Marie and Sadie. We've had a good time planning this. So glad it went well. And really, really appreciative of all the panelists, the moderators, and speakers, the interpreters, and the translators. I'll close out simply just by sharing a story. I've got kids, and so kids give you a lot of good material to work with. But we've got two daughters. My oldest daughter, ever since she was very, very little, was fascinated whenever she'd see me get transferred out of my wheelchair and into bed. And she would say, I'm gonna lift daddy. And we thought it was so cute when she was really little. And she just stuck with it, right? So, years would pass, she'd get a little older. Then she'd say, I'm gonna lift daddy. And she'd grab my leg and wrap her little arms around it, try and kind of pick me up a little bit. And fast forward, we found ourselves dealing with COVID. And like so many other families, we relied on Peloton to help get us through. So my wife and my girls were doing a lot of Peloton stuff, and they're riding the bike, they're doing some weight training. And one night, my daughter, who then was 16, said, tonight's the night. So tonight's the night for what? I'm transferring you from your wheelchair into bed tonight. And I remember I looked at my wife and she looked at me and like, I'm nervous, but okay. And I pulled up next to the bed and my daughter wrapped her arms around my waist. I went 1, 2, 3, lift. And nothing happened. It turned out my wheelchair seatbelt was still on. And that was a rookie mistake. Could have happened to anybody. So she took off my seatbelt, wrapped her arms around me again, said 1, 2, 3, lift. And she picked me up and transferred me over to my bed and laid me down. And as soon as she saw that I was safe, she looked in my eyes and I looked in her eyes, and it was instant tears. And I was very emotional, one, because of the love that a daughter has for a father. But I was also just so proud of her that she had set this goal, which was a very bold goal at the time that she set it. At the time, when she was just a toddler and she was saying, I'm going to lift daddy, it seemed almost ridiculous or impossible. But she stuck with it. She did the work. And eventually she was able to do it. And I share that story because I think about where we've come on this mission. The goals that we set about inclusion and integration and being able to maintain health and safety and our dignity and to be fully a part of the emergency management process. And at the time, that felt almost impossible. But we pushed forward in partnership. And what we've seen is a shift, a cultural shift within emergency management nationwide to steer us as individuals and as practitioners in this better, improved area. We are doing better than we've ever done. We're making more progress than has ever been made. And we're doing things that would once seem impossible. Now, I recognize that we're not there yet. Right? We're not going to hang the mission accomplished banner yet. But we're going to use forums like this symposium as a springboard to get us there. You are a part of this. You have a role to play. Let us empower each other and support each other and lift each other and the communities we serve. And at the end, we'll get there together. So thank you for being here. Please know that all the questions you put in, we're going to get to answers. We're going to send those out. We'll also send out links to all the videos because we've recorded every session. We're going to include links to resources, anything that's been referenced, and we'll also include the transcription. So thank you for being here. Thank you for participating with us, and thank you for partnering on this mission. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.